Okay, it's working, I guess, right? Okay, good afternoon and welcome. Ramadan Mubarak. Today we are going to discuss a very interesting topic. You know, we started discussing this right after the agreement, the nuclear agreement between Iran and the West. And since then, we have been questioning the future of traditional alliances in the Middle East. Do they still hold on? Do they still carry meaning? Especially, seeing, further developments in the region, like, after the nuclear agreement, the Syrian crisis, American, involvement with the PKK in Syria, Obama doctrine, if you read it at the Atlantic Monthly, in which President Obama used very harsh words, actually, about the traditional allies, including Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and also about Israel, in which he called these regional allies as free riders. And one strong answer came from Turki al-Faisal from Saudi Arabia in an op-ed piece in which he said, "No, Mr. President, we are not free riders," explaining why countries like Saudi Arabia are not actually free riders, are the ones actually who have been spending a lot. And by spending, I'm not only talking about financial means, but also energy, in political sphere whatsoever. Anyways, we want to bring in three different perspectives here about this very topic of the future of traditional alliances in the Middle East. And we want to focus on three countries: Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Israel. And I think we have a great panel to discuss, to handle this question of the future of the traditional alliances in the Middle East. I'll start with Philip Amur. He is the assistant professor at Sakarya University's Middle East Institute. He has been writing extensively on security and foreign policy of Israel as well as Palestine. And then we'll continue with Abdullah al-Shammari. He is also an assistant professor at the Diplomatic University in Riyadh. He served as a diplomat in the Saudi Foreign Ministry in Washington, D.C., in Pakistan, and also Turkey. And our third speaker will be Kılıç Burakanat of SETA, Washington, D.C. He is the research director in Washington, D.C., Office of SETA Foundation. And he's also a professor, an assistant professor at the Pennsylvania State University in Erie. He has been writing extensively on Turkish-American relations from different angles. So, Philip, do you want to start? By the way, you have all 15 minutes. If you can wrap up your presentation in 15 minutes so that we can have enough time for a question and answer session. Thank you.
Thanks. It's a great pleasure to be here. Many thanks for your invitation. In the next few minutes, I will talk about two major points. The first point is actually the regional alliances in the Middle East. The second point will be Israel and these major alliances in the Middle East. When we speak of the Middle East as such, I believe we speak of a security system. It's all about security after all. The Middle East, as a regional order, as a security system, emerged after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. We all know this. It took, however, the shape we are keen on now during the since the 1950s. Since the 1950s, the regional order in the Middle East has changed, but took actually its roots since 1950s. So who are the main players in this security system? Usually we speak of two major axes, blocks, if you want. The first block is the so-called conservative moderate camp, or conservative moderate axis. This is not a paradox, by the way, being conservative on one hand and moderate on the other hand. This axis includes classical monarchies and includes one single party republics. The second axis or block is the so-called conservative resistance block. And this block is led by Iran and include Syria, include Lebanon Hezbollah, and used to include the Palestinian Hamas. When it comes to the first so-called conservative moderate camp, the picture is a bit different. This axis used to include, above all, classical conservative monarchies, and more since the 1980s started to include republics as well. There has been since the 80s a Cold War in the Middle East, a Cold War between both, let's say, Saudi Arabia, the leader of the conservative moderate axis on one hand, and a Cold War between the second hegemonic power, Iran, the leader of the conservative resistance bloc. Now, this Cold War has been now extended since the invasion of Iraq, because since the invasion of Iraq, we can observe that the resistance, the conservative resistance bloc, is gaining on power. Because Iraq used to be part of the conservative moderate camp, and after the shift in government, or after the invasion, the American invasion in Iraq, it became affiliated with Iran. And more importantly, actually, the Arab Spring and its impact on regional alliances in the Middle East. We observe that between 2010 and 2013, regional developments in the Middle East took place and developed to the fortune, to the advantage, mostly of the resistance axis, to the disadvantage of the conservative moderate camp. Saudi Arabia lost Egypt. Saudi Arabia lost Tunisia within this period. And between 2010 and 2013, a new and a third bloc emerged on the scene. A bloc that I would like to call a largely elected reformist bloc, consisting of including Turkey, Qatar, and all the newly elected, let's say, Arab Spring governments. However, since 2013, we are witnessing the deconstruction and the weakening of this third bloc. So we can say, to my understanding, regional alliances in the Middle East, if we look between 2013 to 2016 now, we can observe that actually the classical mentioned two axes, the conservative moderate and the conservative resistance, has been maintained, and both blocs were in the position to maintain their existence as such. And this actually explained the interference of Saudi Arabia and Bahrain and elsewhere. On one hand, it explains, on the other hand, the interference on Iran in Syria and elsewhere. Not for necessarily the sake of the third or of the ally, but for the advantage, for the geostrategic or the strategic advantage of the partnership, the whole axis as such. Let me move to the second point, Israel. Where does Israel stand in this constellation, in this polarization in the Middle East? Between 2010 and 2013, Israel was disfortunate from Israeli perspectives about the emergence of the third axis in the Middle East, the emergence of elected parliaments and parliaments that share common political and economic imperatives. The interactions between 2010 and 2013 meant actually, from Israeli perspectives, an imbalance of power, a distribution of power to the disadvantage of Israel. Israel has been, since its inception, has been able to maintain its imperatives in the Middle East. And none of the mentioned axes, none of them was able to withstand Israel. Now, the third elected reformist axis had the potential to actually make regional changes in the Israel-Palestine, Israel-Middle Eastern, Israel-Arab, Israel-Islamic relations. But I believe that regional interactions since 2013, now the negotiation between Turkey on one hand and Israel on the other hand, and adding to this the maybe indirect or direct cooperation between Israel on one hand and Saudi Arabia on the other hand, shows that actually Israel is not losing on power. Rather, it shows that the so-called Arab Spring, or let's say post-Arab Spring, open new opportunities for Israel. New opportunities to come closer to the conservative moderate camp, to fight or to maintain its position against the other two axes, and it gave Israel as well an opportunity to gain tactical achievements against Palestinians, because most Arabs and most actors, let's say state and non-state actors in the Middle East, are now busy with their own national politics, with their own politics. So the post-Arab Spring opened new opportunities to the Israeli advantage. How did Israel react to the regional dynamics in the Middle East? Sometimes in an offensive way and sometimes in a defensive way. All in all, Israel awaited regional dynamics and reacted to them if necessary. With few exceptions, Israel did not actually react much. Exceptions are the war against Gaza in 2012, the war against Gaza in 2014, exception the Israeli attack against Syrian Hezbollah objectives on Syrian ground. These are some few examples of the Israeli actually actions. But apart from this, the Israeli or Israel's official action or foreign policy was wait and see, keep the status quo, consolidate the supremacy, the regional supremacy in the region, and do not open up, do not reconciliate now with neither the Arabs nor the Iranians nor the Turks. Rather, keep the status quo and wait up the future. Because the future, as we see now, is again to Israel's advantage, because all others actually are fighting against themselves, right? Or against each other. So this was it. I hope we can pick up one point or another in the discussion round. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Philip. Maybe an important point that is left out in this discussion is about the Israeli perspective of the American involvement in the region, especially after the nuclear agreement with Iran, because we know that there are a lot of, let's say, criticism coming from Israel towards the United States because of the nuclear deal, and actually questioning the blocks that traditional blocks that Israel sees itself with the United States against, basically Iran and the other axis that you painted actually. Do you want to add,
yes,
in like 2 minutes?
Yes, of course. Yeah, it's let's say each axis is backed up by an intrusive actor. So the conservative, moderate camp has been backed up by the USA as its intrusive actor. The conservative resistance camp, as we know, has been backed up by Russia. Nowadays, in the post-Arab Spring period, none of the actors in the Middle East, none of them is satisfied with the Obama doctrine. There is no state in the Middle East that is satisfied with the Obama doctrine, neither Israel, nor Turkey, and nor Iran, no country. And why is this? Why is this? Because the Obama doctrine is atypical. It's not, it's different from the other American presidents. And Israel is not used to an American president that is conducting, to a certain degree, sovereign and independent American policy, independent and sovereign from the Israeli lobby. So in this regard, Israel wanted actually again to keep the status quo in the Middle East, which means that Israel insisted on either attacking Iran or doing nothing. And as such, Israel criticized the USA for signing the nuclear agreement with Israel, because this nuclear agreement with Israel, thanks to the USA, meant actually 2 points. First point is the rival of Israel and the rival of Saudi Arabia and the rival of the conservative moderate camp is gaining on power, which is Iran. Thankful to the USA and to the nuclear agreement, now Iran is opening up, is having more money and more international contact. So for this reason, above all, Israel is criticizing the USA, because the Obama doctrine is different from previous American doctrines, and it enables Iran indirectly or in one way or another now to arise as a regional power more and more than ever on the coast, and to the disadvantage not just of Israel but to the conservative moderate camp. And this explains actually the opposition and dissatisfaction not just of Israel but of Saudi Arabia and most other countries.
Thank you very much, Philip. Let's hear a Saudi perspective at this point. Dr. Shammari.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I'd like to thank SETA for their kind invitation, and special thanks for Brother Ufuk and Professor Muhyiddin Ataman, who is my resource for the Saudi-Turkish relations. Thank you, all of you, that you came in this Ramadan, long Ramadan in Turkey. And special thanks for their excellencies, ambassadors, who also have very important missions to do, but they left their offices and came to give us the honor for this panel. For me, coming to Ankara is very emotional and romantic time. I spent the best 7 years in my life in Ankara, and my first son was born in Ankara, and they named him Turk. So his name is Turk, and they called me Turk Babasi, and I don't know if this is correct in Turkish or maybe just in Arabic. In my 15 minutes, I will go direct. I will forget about my academic career. I will be a diplomat without diplomacy today. So I will go direct to the subject, try to analyze what's happening in the Saudi-America relations. And as I promised Brother Ufuk, that we shouldn't speak about the past or analyze why this happened. We should speak today about what's happening today and what we are expecting to happen tomorrow for the Saudi-America relations. I will speak about the good news and the bad news, and also I will try to be sometimes critical for the Saudi foreign policy towards the United States, because we are not angels. There were many mistakes that the United States get benefit from to have such a policy toward the Middle East. Also, a very important point before I start my speech, that fortunately, because I'm a specialist in Turkish affairs, I was always comparing between the shift of the American foreign policy or relations toward both Saudi Arabia and Turkey almost in the same time. Because Mr. Obama, when he came to Ankara, I remember in 2009, he was very friendly, and I memorized his speech in the Turkish parliament. He was like pro-Turkish. He was talking about Turkey like the paradise of the Middle East and the great friend. And as well, he came to Saudi Arabia. So we should also talk about the causes behind that shift against Saudi Arabia and Turkey in the same time, but not against Iran. Of course, I have a lot of American friends, and during Mr. Obama's visit, I asked an American friend, is it Mr. Obama policy? He told me, Abdullah, in the United States, we agreed that the maximum responsibility of the president is usually like 20%, 25%. But be sure that this is an American policy towards the Middle East, and it is part of our grand strategy toward the world. So don't think that what's happening in the Middle East is because of Saudi Arabia. He said that we called it Mr. Obama moment, like Nixon moment that happened in the 1970s when Mr. Nixon went to China and to start the relationship between China and United States. So now I will speak also maybe in 2 minutes about what happened for the Saudi-America relations, let's say for the last 5 years, that made things up and down, and we are not now sure, because also there is another news that there is a tension between Saudi Arabia and Turkey, and Turkey always in my heart and in my mind. Saudi Arabia and the United States, but in the same time, we saw Mr. Obama in Riyadh in April 2016, and also we are now watching our Crown Prince, Deputy Crown Prince, Prince Mohammed bin Salman in Washington, and last Friday he met with President Obama. He received him as a state leader, not just as a Deputy Crown Prince. Tell you frankly, in Saudi Arabia, we are very different from Turkey for many reasons. The elite of the Saudi, they are Americans' culture. I am speaking this frankly For example, I feel very sad that I am only one maybe who graduated from Turkish University in Saudi Arabia from political or media sections. But in United States, in Saudi Arabia, you can find all the ministers, or the deputy ministers, or the professors, almost half of the diplomats, they are graduated from American universities, so they have Americans almost, I mean, so mentality, they are a little bit understanding United States. I will just tell you also one thing from the past, because I promised not to talk about the past. When we were in the Diplomatic Institute as a student, I remember we were trained in the Institute of Foreign Service in Virginia, in Washington. Saudi Arabia in 1994 was one of the little countries that United States gave them the opportunity that their diplomats will be trained in the Foreign Institute, and we were trained in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Washington, D.C. So now maybe you are wondering, again, we will come to the today and tomorrow, how the Saudi, they are thinking about the shift of the United States towards Saudi Arabia. Tell you frankly, if you drop the media and the social media, the general impression about America, we are not too much anxious. And I believe that United States, they are trying to give Saudi Arabia some warning to change some policies to be more close. And if you saw Mr. Obama last Friday with Prince Mohammed, you can see that we still have a good position with the United States, maybe better than Turkey, comparing with the United States, because Turkey, they are trying to, support a terrorist organization against Turkey. But in Saudi Arabia, we still have. So the Saudi-America relation, number one, it is still under control. Number two, the loss of the Saudi-American relations, it is from the profit. It is not from the capital. So the capital still kept for the Saudi-American relations. Also, Americans, they told us that there were 3 factors that helped the administration in Washington, D.C. to be more aggressive towards Saudi Arabia. Tell you frankly, all 3 factors, they are coming from Iran. And here, for me, as a very rational and researcher, I don't believe in conspiracy theory. I just go to talk about what's happening in the field between Saudi Arabia and United States. I will conclude with the last maybe 2 or 3 minutes. Iranian, they worked hard against Saudi Arabia and Turkey in the United States through the lobby of the Iranian. And I can tell you frankly, as a personal, I can see Iranians everywhere. In United States, in Europe. For example, Brother Kilic is coming from Washington, D.C. He can go and visit Wonderson Center. He will find the head of the Middle East. She's an Iranian. The head of the Middle East in Carnegie is Iranian. Almost in Brookings, they are Iranian. In the Europe, they are working hard as an academician and as a researcher to work for Iranian, I will say, propaganda. And number 2, United States, they get benefit from the Saudi, and of course Turkey as well, mistakes in Syria. So Saudi Arabia had some mistakes in Syria that Iran take it an excuse to tell Americans, hey, see those Saudi, they are supporting the terrorists and the fanatic groups in the Syria, and those they are supporting Daesh as well. So it is a threat for the United States. Number 3, I witnessed myself during the dialogue between United States and Iran. unfortunately, that breaks the ice between the Iranian and the Americans. And myself, I attend like 4 or 5 track diplomacy with Iranian. I notice that Americans and European, when we discuss about Iran, they are against Saudi Arabia and Turkey in the workshop or in the, let's say, conferences talking about the region. So from this point, I can recommend SETA as well, or Saudi Arabia or Turkey, to be more careful about the lobby, the academic lobby in Washington, especially, and also in Europe, in Brussels, in London, in Paris. We are absent, and I believe the main problem for the Saudi Arabia that we are a government state. What I mean by government state, and here I am talking about the Saudi-American relations, that everything is going through the government. Everything is going through the embassy. I hope the ambassadors will not be angry from me. Everything is going just through the official channels. So they didn't give us a chance for other intellectual, other academician, other influential people to go to the United States and to speak with the Congress or with the think tank there. They just go through the embassy. So now I will tell you what we are thinking about in Saudi Arabia about American-Saudi relations. We said in general that this should be good for Saudi Arabia. It is not secret that Saudi Arabia was used to be criticized, that we were friends of United States, we were agents of United States, we were like this of United States. So now this is good chance for Saudi Arabia to get listen from Americans, to be more independent, and to lead the region with an Islamic and Gulf. And as you see, if you notice, I don't want to repeat some details in the news, that Saudi Arabia is working hard to make Turkey more close, to cooperate with GCC and the region for the Islamic coalition, or maybe through Islamic organization to counter both Iranian and United States influence. So we are not that much anxious, we are not that much unhappy from the American. And myself, I wrote part of my master's degree about the influence of the American embargo against Turkey during Cyprus crisis. That was good for Turkey. And I am sure now if you see the military, for example, industry in Turkey, that happened just because what happened in 1974. So now in Saudi Arabia, we are thinking that we should be more rational, we should try our best to correct some of our mistakes, and we should be more, let's say, wise, to be more political science thinkers, not talking about ideology. I believe in the future, and this is my last seconds, that the Saudi-American relations will continue as institutional cooperation. It will not be like an emotional relationship like what happened before. And finally, our maybe personal criticism against Mr. Obama, that he crossed the red lines for 2 Saudi Americans. Red lines, number one, he criticized Saudi Arabia in public, and that made us, you know, Arab and maybe the people in the East, they are very sensitive about criticism, so we got a little bit offended by Mr. Obama. Number two, that it was for the first time that Mr. Obama talked about the interior problems in Saudi Arabia. So that was a red line that usually Americans, they don't speak with the Saudi about human rights or about frustration of the people in Saudi Arabia. So that makes, for me, like a message that Saudi Arabia should take this too in serious. And thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shammari. And Kılıç, what does the Obama doctrine mean for Turkish-American relations? Is it mostly Obama that we are talking about, or are we talking about a concerted American foreign policy shifting in the Middle East and influencing countries like Turkey?
Thank you very much. And Couple things. I will try to respond to your questions and say a few words about Turkish-American relations, and hopefully I will finish my 4 points in 3 minutes each, and so that I can be good in timing. The first thing is about when we are talking about the alliances, the debate about the alliances is not new, and since the end of the Cold War we keep having debates about the meaning of alliances. Because of that, the scholars and observers started to be very shy about the wording of alliances, right? We started to use the concepts like alignments, coalition, partnerships. Even pacts are not used. We basically avoid to use a very militarized version of this cooperation in international relations nowadays. And since the end of the Cold War, since this started to have some problems, and in a unipolar world, nobody thought about the alliances, and even the very hypothetical studies in international relations in 1990s focused on the continuation of unipolarity and difficulty to challenge the US leadership and difficulty to create alliances in different parts of the world that can balance the US hegemony or regional hegemony of some regional powers. But when we come in 2000s, we started to have these debates more deeply, and we started to question the alliances one more time again, because in different instances, in critical junctures of international relations in the last 15 years, such as September 11, the Iraq War, and following the Arab Spring, we again started to use these concepts, but at the same time we were thinking about what we mean by strategic alliances, right? Actually, when everybody was talking about strategic alliances, they were thinking tactical alliances, which are basically alliances that you create, mostly ad hoc alliances that you create against a threat perception, right? And that are not institutionalized, not militarized mostly, and usually ends after the end of that threat perception. So we have confusion about the meaning of alliance system, right? So what is tactical alliance? What is strategic alliance? What is historic alliance? What is natural alliance? What are the partnership? What are strategic partnership, model partnership, or enduring partnership? What are the alignments? So when even the policymakers, when they were talking about this, they were talking these terms rhetorically in order to show that United States or other countries around the world have common interests and common concerns about regional and global issues, but they never institutionalize or clarify the concept of alliance system. Secondly, in terms of US politics, in the last 15 years, we have serious problems about understanding US foreign policy. Because US foreign policy itself basically avoid using alliances and depend on coalitions, right? Both the coalition of willing in the Iraq War and coalition against ISIS were coalitions. They avoid to use the term alliances because they really couldn't come up with an institutionalized and long-term sustainable partnership between countries. So when we were talking about the Bush years, we were talking about a coalition of willing, right, which was a tactical alliance against Saddam regime, which didn't fill the security vacuum in Middle East, no institutionalization, and it actually created concern and trust problems in Middle East between United States and United States Middle Eastern alliances. It focused on unilateral intervention, right? It didn't care about the multilateralism, and it actually destabilizes the region. And when President Obama became president, actually, most of his first year focused on rebuilding these alliances. Actually, it was, if you ask in 2009, what is the Obama doctrine, and why did he get the Nobel Peace Prize by doing nothing, most of the people said his effort to rebuild the alliances around the world, right? His trip to Turkey, his trip to European Union, right? And NATO, you know, like all of these international organizations signals the return of multilateralism in US foreign policy. But what we end up seeing is usually something different, right? we started to see that in the continuation of Obama's term, especially starting from the second Obama administration, we started to see lack of clarity about US strategic objectives. So the question of alliances, the question of US relations with its traditional allies became an important question. Because globally, United States was discussing among itself and having an identity crisis about retrenchment, retreat, or reclining US power. And regionally, when we look at the Middle East, there was constant emphasis on what at that time President Obama called a responsibility doctrine. And we weren't clear what responsibility doctrine really entails. So is it only a burden sharing, right? Or is it something that criticizes the free riders? Is it a withdrawal of US from the Middle East? It was never clarified, right? So this was ad hoc, this was rhetorical, but President Obama was not aware that this policy, both globally and regionally in the Middle East, was creating serious concerns among US allies, right? And it wasn't only the Middle Eastern countries. In different US allies, we started to have similar debates. We were talking just before the meeting, in Japan we have these debates, in Poland we have these debates. Even between the EU and US relations, we have similar debates, right? The most frequently asked question in the last 8 years in European security architecture is basically, where is the transnational partnership going, right? What does transnational security arrangements mean in the new, like the international system? So what we end up having is a increasing skepticism about President Obama and his doctrine in Middle Eastern countries. And in the last 2-3 interviews that he gave to Atlantic Monthly and his communication strategist interview to New York Times, we started to see that actually President Obama didn't care about alliances that much. President Obama called allies as free riders, and was extremely critical about the US allies in Middle East. So there is now more skepticism, right? More question marks about what US is planning to do in Middle East. And when you look at the observers in different countries, everybody is expecting the next president. They don't even want to discuss the alliance system in President Obama's period anymore. So the next question is, what will be the nature of alliances in the next President Trump or Clinton? The third issue that I want to raise is the problem about the situation in Middle East and the fluidity of the situation in Middle East. So the alliances, what alliances mean among the regional countries is also a major question mark. So what is the motivation for alliances in Middle East? Are we talking about regime security, or are we talking about the defense structures, right? So what we see is, especially starting the Arab Spring, we started to see that most of the regional alignments, not alliances, but the alignments took place because of the concern about regime security, right? Saudi foreign policy, especially after the Arab Spring, we see that regime security was the key in determining the foreign policy behavior. But after the Iran nuclear deal, we started to see a major shift, starting, like the debates, actually, the P5+1 negotiations. We started to see that the main concern of some of the regional countries, including Israel and Saudi Arabia, turned into a case, basically country defense structures, right? External security concern, external threat perception became the main motivation in determining the regional alignment systems. So for the future of the Middle East now, when we are talking about the regional system in Middle East, we have serious question about which threat perception and which priority is more important for these countries. Are we talking about regime security, or are we talking about a serious external defense threat perception? And finally, about the Turkish-American relations. So when we are talking about Turkish-American relations in Ankara and in Washington, D.C., for the last 25 years, we used some nice concepts like model partnership. We continue to express wishful thinking about the strategic nature of the relation between two countries. But what we end up after 15, 20 years of debate about the Turkish-American relations is something ambivalent, right? Something what we can call a more transactional partnership. Some people call this an a la carte partnership, that they will pick and choose the areas that they have to work together, right? There's a good news and bad news about the US-Turkish partnership in this sense. The good news is both countries are NATO members. So there is a very strong security architecture, very strong organizational umbrella that will in some instances stabilize the relationship between Turkey and United States, especially considering the Russian threat perception, right? Especially after the Ukrainian crisis, we started to see that, well, this will be an anchorage for the bilateral relations between two countries. So this is good news. But there is a bad news, right? Since the beginning of the Syrian crisis, we started to see a diverging interest and diverging strategies of these two countries. At the beginning, the differences between two countries were mostly, right, they were using euphemisms by saying that, well, there is some operational divergences, there is tactical divergences, but they have very strong strategic convergence in terms of their policy in Syria. But what we end up coming after 5 years in Syria conflict is two countries started to have significant strategic differences as well. Significant strategic divergences. And there is now a question mark about the alliance system. So Turkey and United States continue to be NATO allies, right? So this is a historic alliance. But United States started to use some tactical alliances. They prefer to use tactical partnerships, right, with PYD forces in northern Iraq and northern Syria. And this is a serious problem for Turkey, considering the threat perception of PKK in Turkey right now, right? If this happened when the peace process was going really well, this might have different implication. But considering the threat perception of Turkish state right now, the tactical partnership between United States and PYD can be a significant destabilizer for the good news that I just mentioned, right? Historical alliance between two countries, right? Which means that, you know, like the institutional dimension will continue, but considering the emergence of skepticism, emergence of trust and confidence problem in both countries, especially in Turkey in regards to US military assistance to PYD, can have very long-term, right, implications for both for bilateral relations. Just one last note, and I'm on the 13th minute right now, just one last note that I will finish. The Cuban Missile Crisis and US abandonment of Turkey in the midst of the Cold War had very significant, right, very significant perceptual problem for the US in Turkey for long years, right? And since then, probably, the most significant crisis is taking place right now in Turkish-American relations. The artificial distinction between PYD and PKK may not seem very important in Washington, D.C., but the perception of this partnership between US and PYD and mid-term and long-term implication of this military assistance to Turkish security can basically not only destabilize Turkish-American relations, but it can also destabilize the NATO and security architecture in Europe as well. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Kılıç, and thank you all for keeping up with the time limit. I know 15 minutes is not enough to explain all your thought in your mind, but I think we're going to have more opportunity in the next session to expand on what you have just told. At this point, let's turn to the floor and collect a couple of questions. But before turning to you, please identify yourself before asking your question. And keep your questions as short as possible so that we can collect as many questions as possible. The floor is yours. Okay. The first question is always the most difficult, I guess. Yes.
I want to ask about the Israeli-Saudi relations in the future, for both Mr. Shammari and also from the perception of Mr. Amour. How do they see the future of the Saudi-Israeli relations in the region in general?
Maybe I may add one thing here. Right after the nuclear deal, also during the talks were going on, there were rumors that, Gulf countries met with Israel to discuss the very, concepts that we are now talking about, the future of alliances, what we can do on the face of, increasing, Iranian influence in the region. So also, if you can answer this question within the context of these rumors, maybe it would be good. You have any other questions, or shall we? Please go ahead, Mr. Ambassador.
I think the three panelists they have. I am the head of mission of the League of Arab States to Ankara. The three panelists have really made very precious presentations, but the title, which is very provocative, talking about Turkey, Israel, and Saudi Arabia, nobody has tackled this problem. And I think our Saudi colleague here, he knows about the API, the Arab Peace Initiative, which is now coming to the table again through the French. Rumors, a lot of rumors about this relationship. I want to add just one thing. In 2007, there was a project presented by ex-President Abdullah Gül, and we had took note of this in the Arab League. It was about creating organization of security and organization European of Middle East organization of security in the Middle East, like the OSCE,
Okay.
And the partnership with including all Arab countries, plus Turkey, plus Israel. There was no talk about Iran. Anyhow, thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, let's pass to the Mr. Ambassador too.
I am Mansour Abdallah, the ambassador of Lebanon in Ankara. I have some remarks which turn into questions. Mistakes. How can the US blame Saudis for ISIS when the coalition against Maliki was made in the United States? Coalition against Maliki, which means Kurds, tribal leaders, ex-Baathists, and the Islamists. Said it was not the invention of Saudi Arabia, it's the invention of the Americans. And Carol O'Leary, National Defense Institute, was here in Ankara, in Usak, promoting it. That was 2 months before they took over Mosul. Second, I have a question which is a bit old, but how can Turkey enter northern Cyprus without some approval from the states or some part of the states? Because I always ask the states if they have a parallel government in the United States. Some part of the United States agreed for the entry of Turkey in northern Cyprus. If not, I don't think it's a big project to do. I have a question concerning Obama. Obama made 3 speeches, one in Prague, one in Istanbul, and one in Cairo. and he got a honorary doctorate. Who paid for that doctorate that time? And will they now take this doctorate from him because he didn't accept to bombard Syria? It's very possible. Now we are talking about alliances and coalitions. Coalitions mean, come protect me and I will call you if I need you. Now, a question for Turkey. If Turkey accepts this kind of casual a la carte relationship, can they expect a better delivery from the United States of America? Is it our fault always in everybody, every country, when we accept this casual a la carte relationship with the United States? This is what we get. And second, I have something concerning this. At some time, some 2 years ago, we could see there was a kind of, I think you spoke about it, this economic zone, which is northern Iraq. Good relationship with northern Iraq. Are we planning to have a new zone in Syria, which will be a military buffer between Turkey and Syria, or in the future, Turkey and the Arab world, and a good economic buffer zone for the Turkish military, industry, agriculture, everything. That means this buffer zone will be dependent on Turkey because it cannot be depending on the Syrians. Then, do we know everything? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's get one more question here. Or take that question and let's take two questions and then turn to the audience.
My name is Christian Mikscher. I'm from the Austrian embassy. And I really want to thank you, especially the ambassador, Mr. Shammari, for frankly speaking. And my question is to you, which I wanted to ask, how will Saudi Arabia in the future establish a balance in the region in order to lead the Middle East, what you said? Who can be the partners? Yeah.
Thank you. And let's get the last question here.
Hello, this is Mohammed Al-Saftawi from Ghent University, assistant professor. I do have some questions. First one, I would like to ask, what role does Turkey play in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict? The second one, the scenario regarding the future of Turkey-Israel relations and the impact on the Palestinian cause. The third one, the new Prime Minister Ali ibn Yadrib has sent 4 days ago new messages for Russia, Egypt, Israel to rebuild their relations. What does that mean? Is that AKP party has realized that the failure of their foreign Turkish policy the last period? Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Let's start with you, Philip.
Okay, I hope I have understood all questions. Now, I will try to answer those questions that I'm keen on. Regarding the Saudi Arabia relationships, I think that there are relationships. I cannot approve this, but I think that the future will show us that there are strategic, there are close cooperation going on between Israel on one hand and Saudi Arabia on the other hand regarding regional security. And I think that we can call it an informal, let's say, partnership. I don't think that this partnership will become visible in the near middle future to the wider public. So this is maybe regarding the Saudi-Israeli relations, and there must be or there is a cooperation going on because both share, let's say, share strategic interests against Iran, and both have common interests in the Middle East. Regarding maybe Turkey and the Palestinian issue, let me give you an example. Israel fought two wars against Gaza, one in 2012 and one in 2014. In 2012, Israel had to make some concessions toward Hamas, had to compromise because of political changes in Egypt. And at that time, Egypt was positive, and Israel made many compromises. In 2014, we saw that actually Israel was not willing to make any compromises at all. So the existence of a regional power that is neutral in one way, but putting a diplomatic pressure on Israel on the other way, is important to create an, let's say, Israeli-Palestinian agreement, a legitimate, a fair one to both parties. And as such, I think Turkey could play this neutral mediator role to put pressure on Israel to make compromises for the sake of a peace agreement between Israel and between the Palestinians. So I see Turkey is in an important role and potential, maybe a position that no other Arab country can offer nowadays or afford. Yes, if I may just make one comment to regional alliances in the Middle East. I think we should be able to reflect upon these regional alliances in the Middle East, informal and formal ones, without reflecting them from the American perspectives. We should really switch off the American glass and try to study, explore the regional, Middle Eastern, formal and informal alliances, whatever you call them, without using the USA to explain and explore and analyze these partnerships. Because actually, these partnerships and alliances, they function independent to a larger extent from American sphere. Thank you.
Kılıç?
To add a few words, I think the creating a regional security architecture is a wishful thinking, and like for years now, different regional actors are saying that we need to find regional problems to regional actors. But what we don't need to forget is the current international system. In the current international system, at least, U.S. has a major clout, and even both the presence and absence of United States from a region can create serious troubles, right? And yes, we need to create regional solutions for the regional problems, but what we don't need to expect is, in terms of both military, projection of military power, in terms of, the international organizational power, in terms of economy, U.S. is still there. So even when we are looking for regional solutions, we always need to pay attention to United States at certain point. That would be more realistic, I guess. Secondly, in terms of Obama's policy, what I mean is there is a need to clarify the strategic objectives of United States. So what we don't have right now, especially in the last 15 years, is we have some national security doctrine, national security papers, etc. But we end up having the last national security doctrine paper of President Obama is basically based on a concept on strategic patience, right? So it means basically nothing. So we need to have a clear U.S. objectives. When Hillary Clinton wrote this piece to foreign policy in September 2010 on Asia pivot, everybody in Asia had clear idea what United States is planning to do. right? Military redeployment, you know, like the diplomatic forward, you know, like the forward diplomatic movements, economic statecraft. There was a clarity among the allies that, okay, US wants this, and, you know, like the US probably will do that. I'm not talking about the consistency, right? Henry Kissinger said the only consistent thing in US foreign policy is inconsistency. So it can be inconsistent, but it needs to have a roadmap. And even in Washington, D.C., they are discussing, if you ask a US strategy in Syria, they are saying, is there one or not, right? Rhetorical action is not a strategy. Speeches are not a strategy. So there need to be a clear understanding of what US wants, what US is planning to do. Secondly, in terms of the a la carte partnership, we don't need to forget that when we are talking about the US relations with Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Israel, we are talking about an asymmetric relation. So this is not a symmetric relation. This is the relation of the relation between a superpower and a regional actor, or one or two regional actors. So of course, you know, like this is the Spider-Man rule, right? Great power brings great responsibility, and great power brings great expectations. And when you break your expectations, when you have serious question marks about your commitments, about your assurances, about your agreements, or about your red lines, you will have serious repercussions in the countries, you know, like in the region. Thirdly, in terms of Turkish-Israeli relation, I just want to add that, you know, like there is negotiations going on, there is confidential negotiations going on between Turkey and Israel, etc. You know, like the economic relations are fine, you know, like they can reach a political agreement. But at the end of the day, you know, like what we need to understand is Turkey is a democracy, and the public opinion here has been very attentive to issues related to Israeli policies in this country, at least for the last 20, 25 years. Right? When we are talking about the golden years of Turkish-Israeli relations in 1990s, if you look at these relations in the context of 50 years of, you know, like the roller coaster relations, you will see that 1990s were only exceptions, right? And the major weakness of the Turkey-Israeli pact, if you want to call it, in 1990s was its social dimension, its public opinion dimension, right? So there would be, you know, like Turkish government would always be very attentive to what public thinks about its relation with Israel. So this would be a major determinant of relations between two countries. And in this sense, the questions of Palestine, or the question of Gaza, if you want to specify it, will continue to be there, can be destabilizer for the future of relations between two countries. Thank you.
Thank you for all questions. Very important. And I will start where Brother Kilic finished with Israeli-Saudi relations. It is kind of legitimacy for the regime and for the Saudi Arabia as a leader of the Middle East. I mean, it is not our choice to have a relationship with Israel or not. So, for example, Saudi Arabia doesn't recognize Israel as a state. If we come to the Arabian initiative where His Excellency asked, yes, Saudi Arabia, I believe, because of 11 September, huge influence or reaction from United States, it was just a written initiative. And if you come to the reality, there is no zero, you know, I mean, speaking or negotiation between Saudi Arabia and Israel for the initiative. I will tell you two very important points about such an imagination about Saudi-Israeli relations. Number one, try to find Iranian when they were talking that Israel and Saudi Arabia were planning to attack Iran nuclear program, and there were some coordination between Israeli and Saudi through military channels that Saudi Arabia could facilitate Israeli to come and cross the sky of Saudi Arabia, maybe of Jordan. And this is just an imagination. Number two, Yeah, I can admit that with the social media, we have some crazy, I mean, let's say, actors, we said like Dili in Turkish, sometimes like Brother Anwar Ishki or some elements, they are talking about Israeli-Saudi relations, but for academia and for diplomacy, you can't depend on any resource if it is not official. So now I will come to the maybe same question for the Israeli-Palestine-Saudi relations. For example, yesterday, President of Palestine was in Jeddah, in Saudi Arabia, and I will tell you something very special and maybe very private to SETA about the relationship between Saudi Arabia and Hamas, and the relationship between Saudi Arabia and the Brotherhood in general in the region. Our Palestinian brothers maybe know how much Saudi Arabia gave efforts to make Hamas and Fatah sit together. And 2 times, I remember in Mecca, King Abdullah that time tried to let both come and sign an agreement. Unfortunately, it doesn't work for the second week maybe because of the 2 sides. So even our doors with Hamas, it is very open. And I will tell you something maybe very frank, that when it comes to Saudi Arabia, despite the propaganda, we are very close to the Brotherhood because it is ideology. But we are disagreeing with some parts of Brotherhoods who are sometimes very political, let's say, because I can tell you frankly, I am always joking, saying that Saudi Arabia and Brotherhood, even if they fight each other, it will be friendly fires. So we don't go so far when we disagree, even with Hamas, for example, or with. So I can tell you very frank that there is no such any official relationship between Saudi Arabia and Israel. They raised this question when Saudi Arabia took back Sanafir and Tehran islands from Egypt, saying that Saudi Arabia could negotiate with Israel, and this is also not in reality, despite sometimes you can find it in the social media. Talking about also Daesh, His Excellency, it is frank that there is 2, I think, kind of relationship between Saudi Arabia and the United States, and I believe this is the same for Turkey. When it comes for officials, they know how much military and intelligence cooperation between the 2 countries, Saudi Arabia, America, and the United States and Turkey. So, for example, Daesh, I can tell you frankly that Daesh is a threat for Saudi Arabia more than the region, more than Iran, more than even European or American security, because it is threatening us as a threat for legitimacy for the royal family in Saudi Arabia and for the Saudi Arabia as a leader of the Islamic and as the custodian of the 2 holy mosques and Mecca, Medina. So we are competing with Daesh, not in military ways. They are a real threat for Saudi Arabia to be saying that we are the Dawla al-Islamiyya, Islamic State, you are not. So we are more aggressive than Daesh, more than, I mean, some countries to fight Daesh. Because Daesh for us, it is a threat. It is a political threat. And we just take the terrorist or military threat maybe in the second line. Last question about is Saudi Arabia is going to lead. I can remind you, His Excellency, our Foreign Minister for the Sky, I think TV, when he said for the European and Americans, he asked them, are you going to support or are you going to lead? If you are not going to lead, or if you are not going to support, I mean, he gave like a priority for the European. If you are not going to lead, we will lead. So don't criticize us. Also, since I am in Turkey, I can tell you frankly that the good news that the cooperation now, the military cooperation between Saudi Arabia and Turkey, it is more than you imagine. It is more than which is in the news. And today, I believe, I don't know if it's in Konya or somewhere, we will have like 5 days military exercises between Saudi Arabia and Turkey for, despite it's in Ramadan, but it's almost for 5 years. So now, one of the alternatives for Saudi Arabia is to strengthen the relationship with Turkey, with both military, and I believe one of our brothers, he wrote an article that Prince Mohammed bin Salman is aiming to involve Turkey in the military industry for his Vision 2030. And I remember when we came to SETA with the delegation with King Salman, from here we came from the presidential palace. So there is now very rational rethinking about the relationship between Saudi Arabia and Turkey. Also the good news that GCC with the Turkey, they are trying to have an independent, it will be not easy because unfortunately we were addicted to United States for almost 7 decades. So yes, Saudi Arabia is trying their best, and you might be surprised that Americans, they are asking Saudi Arabia to be more independent, and this is Mr. Obama, he said this in frank way, that you should depend on yourself and protect yourself from Iran. Thank you.
Thank you very much all for these nice presentations. Please join me in thanking our panelists. And thank you all for coming. It seems that these discussions will continue for some more time, and it would be very interesting to have this conversation after the election of a new president in the United States, to see the continuations or ruptures in the American foreign policy in the region. But in addition to that, I think discussions revolving around the regional actors, the alliances in between regional actors, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Israel, Turkey, and with the other Arab countries, would be also a great contribution to our understanding of what's really happening in the region in terms of alliances, both regional and intra-regional, inter-regional alliances. But thank you all for coming, and hope to see you again in our next panel. Thank you.